People who were held hostage. What's your story? Might be more of a kidnapping than hostage situation, but close enough. My parents were divorced when I was 6. A couple years later, my dad moved across the country to California. Fast forward to when I was 12. It was agreed that he would fly to Michigan and my sister, 13, and I would fly out to California with him for a week, then he would fly back with us. The trip was pretty crap. He was a terrible father. For example, he took us to Reno, Nevada, and stuck us in a buffet while him and his new wife gambled all night. Stuff like that. The day we were supposed to fly back, he tried to convince us to stay. We declined and said we wanted to go home. He basically said, "Too bad," and wouldn't take us to the airport. I ended up running distraction while my sister called home and gave my mom the scoop. An hour later, a cab showed up to my dad's place for my sister and I. My dad tried to tell the cabbie to leave, but apparently my mom, aunts, and uncles made it very clear that the cab wasn't to leave until we were in the car. Honestly, I have no idea how they paid for it. I'm guessing they prepaid via credit card over the phone. Seems risky in the 90s. My sister and I finally got into the cab and proceeded to fly, by ourselves, back to Michigan with a connecting flight. Our uncle was there at the airport waiting for us at 5 a.m. To this day, I'm floored that we made it back. Shout out to the flight attendants on Northwest Airlines in the mid-90s. One sat with us the whole time on the first flight because the turbulence was so bad. Also, when we got lost during the connection, a Northwest employee helped us get on our connecting flight in time. Next story. Someone robbed a bank and held a gun to my head when the teller didn't give him the money immediately. I just remember feeling absolutely nothing the entire time, and the only thought in my head was that I'd be okay with dying because it'd at least be quick. It wasn't until a couple hours after the incident when my emotions actually hit me and I cried. I had some lingering panic attacks for a few months after, but they went away and I had no other PTSD symptoms. These days, I feel completely fine about it and use it as an icebreaker when it feels appropriate. I was also a senior in college when it happened and was known as the bank robbery girl the rest of the year through graduation, lol. Next story. My father is a truck driver in Sao Paulo, Brazil. One time when I was a kid, he got kidnapped by a gang. They rode with him in a car all day while they stole the cargo, Brazilian candy, from the truck. They took him to get coffee and stuff, so I guess it wasn't that bad, but at the time, he was really afraid for his life and his truck. In the end, they ended up giving the truck back to him and letting him go peacefully. Months later, the police managed to arrest some of them and asked my dad to recognize them, but he didn't want to get involved. P.S. A rival candy company was behind the whole thing. Brazil is not for amateurs. Next story. I reported someone for SA and he ended up kidnapping me and holding me hostage for about 7 hours or so. I was tied up in his car and we kept driving around. It was so effing lonely, thinking you're going to die in a beautiful sunny day when people are walking around living their life and you're stuck with a psycho. As it got later, he got more erratic and the threats got darker. It got to about midnight and we were at an impasse where he realized he'd be in a world of crap if he let me go, so he felt there were two choices. 1, let me go and be arrested, or 2, not let me go and drive to the mountains and stay there for the weekend while he thought things through. I knew if option 2 happened, I was as good as dead. God knows how, but I pulled some of the best acting skills I had out of the bag. I manipulated the F out of him and got him to call a mutual friend of ours and berate me about how toxic I was and this friend could help him as he had gone through depression, etc. Our mutual friend was my ex, who was actually on a date. He still hasn't let me live that particular chicken block down. And he convinced Psycho to admit he was holding me prisoner and then to untie me and present himself to the hospital. Then he called the guards who got me to safety. The man saved my life. And this, my friends, is why you should stay on good terms with your exes. Easier said than done. Of course, I'm kidding, but it's funny how that turned out. Next story. My biological father held me hostage as an infant. He broke into my mother's apartment and stole me from my crib. He was pissed that my mother left him. He was an abusive POS, and he was going to take me back to his parents' house to hide me. He was threatening to kill me if anyone tried to get me back, if my mother followed him, or if the cops got involved. The cops got involved, obviously. His parents were actually the ones who called the cops, snuck into his room while he was sleeping off his booze to steal me back, took me to the hospital. I still have scars from him cutting me because I wouldn't stop crying, and probably because getting stabbed isn't a good way to get a baby to calm down. The house was raided shortly after, and he was arrested. He spent some time in prison, I don't know how long, before being released, marrying someone else, and then getting arrested again for abusing his new wife's children. I don't have any recollection of this incident. I'm sorry if this wasn't the type of response you were hoping for. Next story. So, he wasn't held hostage, but when my dad was about 18, he worked for a gardening center in Chicago, and he was closing for the night. Every night, my dad's job was to close up and walk the money from the registers to the owner's house. So right before closing, a guy came in and pulled a gun out, demanding all the money in the register. So my dad, being the only one there, and with a gun in his face, opens the register and gives the guy like $60. The dude obviously took the cash and ran off, and my dad, being the calm guy he is, just shook it off and locked up. He still had to go to the owner's house, so he did and explained to the owner that they had been robbed, and the owner was all worried and asked how much money they lost, and my dad told him it was about $60. The owner was pretty relieved because obviously he expected to have had more money stolen, and so he asked my dad, "That's all we made today?" And my dad said, "No, here's your $3,000. Since my dad's job was to walk the money to the owner's house every night, he had already cleared out most of the register and put the money in his jacket pocket, only leaving some extra cash in the register in case someone came in last minute and he needed change. So my dad stood there with a gun pointed at him and $3,000 hidden in his pocket and gave the guy with the gun $60 because he asked for the money in the register. You know, they say that luck is where preparation meets opportunity, and not only was he lucky to get off of this without any kind of injury, but only $60 versus a potential $3,000 in losses. Well done, Dad. Next story. My sister was living in London and doing her food shop one evening when some druggie held a knife to her throat in an attempt to get the cashier to open the till. My sister pretended to faint, slid out of the guy's grip, and the security guard grabbed the druggie and sat on him till the police got there. My sister started applying for work outside London the following morning. Next story. My aunt and uncle held me hostage when I was 8 years old because they didn't agree with the way my mother lived, and they manipulated their children into keeping me locked in their house while my mom was calling the police trying to get me back. I was bawling my eyes out. This happened twice. Next story. When I was in preschool, I got in a fight with my babysitter and ran off to the backyard of the apartment building. Our upstairs neighbor saw me and invited me in. I talked to her while she painted and stuff. Apparently, she was not mentally well and refused to give me back to my babysitter, who called the police. She also refused to give me back to the police. I'm not sure how they got me back, but I have a memory of being on the stairs behind her crying and reaching for the police officers as they tried to talk her down. Next story. Robbed at gunpoint 20 years ago when I was 18 working at Hollywood Video. 15 minutes before closing, and it's just me and the assistant manager working that night. The office and bathroom were in the back. She went to drop the money in the safe in the office, and I went to the bathroom. We both came out at the same time and see a masked man at the front of the store with what looked like a effing hand cannon. He motioned for us to come to the front with the gun and demanded she empty the register while he held the gun about an inch from my face. He got $50 out of the drawer that was in there and then turned around and left. As if this ordeal wasn't bad enough, the encounter with the police after was almost as traumatizing. They questioned me like I was the one that robbed the store, or was somehow in on it. Every question I answered was met with hostility and doubt, and they asked me to describe him. I said he was tall and black, and they asked me how I could possibly know he was black if he wore a mask. Well, I can see his hands. They asked me about the weapon, and I said it was a silver gun, like a .45 or 9mm. Then I got grilled, how I, quote, knew so much about guns. They asked me to come to the police station so I could give my statement. By that time, my dad had shown up because I had called him. We went to the police station, and they put me in what I can only imagine is an interrogation room. At first, they wouldn't let my dad in the room with me. I told them I wanted him there with me. So they relented and let him in the room. Then the detectives started grilling me like I was the one who robbed the place. My dad had to step in and put a stop to it, asked if I was a suspect in the robbery, if I was being arrested, if I was being detained. No to all of them, so he said we were leaving, which we did. Next story. I was held hostage by my father, unbeknownst to me and my other siblings. I was only around 5 at the time and had 2 brothers, 7 and 9, and 2 younger sisters, but not of school age. My father had just recently been kicked out of the house by mother for being abusive. So my father came to our primary school and took us out for a walk by the river. It was enjoyable as a child and was a memory I kept. Turns out he took us down to the river that day to drown us as revenge. Shook me to the core when I found out as an adult. Took a lot of convincing by my mother and years of more abuse for him not to. Next story. I will keep this vague for obvious reasons, but a coworker of mine was held hostage for ransom by MS-13. At the company I used to work for, we often did work for companies in Mexico. The teams that went down there were often escorted by armed guards in a caravan. Thankfully, I never had to go down there. Long story short, this particular coworker decided to venture out of the hotel without an escort, got nabbed, taken to a shack out in the middle of nowhere. The MS-13 gang members went through his belongings, found his employer contact info, contacted them demanding a ransom. Somehow, the guy managed to escape, ran to a gas station, I think, and the attendant hit him, contacted the federals who brought the guy to a station and waited for the escort team to bring him back across the border. Next story. It wasn't really a hostage situation, but it was very close to being considered a kidnapping by the police. One Christmas, my brother and I spent the morning at our dad's, and our grandma offered to drop us off at our mom's. Things were okay until she started going in the wrong direction towards the Canadian border. Despite, my brother and I took the drive from our dad's to our mom's countless times. She refused to listen to us and kept driving in the wrong direction for about an hour. This was before any of us had cell phones, so we just had to sit there. She only realized her mistake when the signs indicating the border crossing started showing up. She then turned around and finally went the right way. It took us another hour to get back to the turn she'd mistakenly taken, but it was another 2 hours back to our mom's. This meant that it took us over 4 hours to do a 1-hour drive. When we got to our mom's house, there was a police car in the driveway, and our mom was worried as hell. When we didn't arrive at the planned time, she started to worry and called our dad's house, but they'd already left as well. She was honestly more worried that we'd gotten into a crash or something, but the police thought it could have been a kidnapping considering we're so close to the border and my parents weren't getting along at that time. Not to mention, we also had a family up in Canada, too. They already had cars out looking for us, but were about to call in for a bigger search, but we arrived before they could. Nobody was ever charged with anything, and it ended peacefully, but it was definitely the first sign of my grandma having dementia. Within a year, she'd faded so much, and it really hit our whole family hard. 2 years later, she passed away. Next story. Was at a large gathering in the mid-90s, was sitting near the front of the arena, noticed an anxious-looking guy dressed unusually compared to the rest of the thousands in attendance. Didn't think much of it. Featured speaker gets up, and this guy evades security to rush the podium. Claims to have explosives in his briefcase. Makes outlandish demands of speaker. Says nobody is leaving until demands are met. Guy gets distracted by audience reaction. Foolhardy audience member sneaks up and maces him. Security and other audience members dogpile him. He's taken away, battered, and bruised. Speaker finishes his remarks and says nothing else about the previous events. I go back to my apartment, wondering if that really happened. Friends and I laugh over the next few days as the event is embellished and misrepresented in all manner of ludicrous ways in the news. Yeah, gotta love the news just taking this small tabloid of fact and over-embellishing it and just romanticizing it into being this absolute tale that it never was. It's amazing how fiction develops like that. Next story. I've been held hostage several times in my life. The first time was when I was 5. My mother told my father she was going to leave him. He held the whole family at shotgun point in the living room for about 24 hours before he finally fell asleep. The second time was when the predator, my mother rented me out as a child, thought I was going to rat him out. He held me in his living room at shotgun point for a full day while in a manic rage. The third time was just 3 years ago, when an assassin hired by either my childhood abuser or my ex-wife's father held me at campsite for a few hours at gunpoint and demanded I get in his truck, which I refused and was eventually able to make an opportunity to get away. Yeah, I have chronic PTSD, and these are just some of the reasons. Next story. I was at a party and a girl invited me back to her place. I was excited, but something felt a little off once we started walking. I told her I was going home because I was a little too drunk. She said some persuasive things and we laughed a bit. I went with her. We got to her place and it was nice but a mess. She had lots of new things laying around, but there is packaging all over too. She invited me to her room, and there was a guy in her bed in his underwear. I immediately did a 180 and ran towards the front door. The door was locked and had an interior keyed lock. He said, "You took my Coke. Where's my effing Coke?" I turned around, and he had a crazy-looking assault rifle pointed at me. I told him I needed to leave, and the girl was asking him to calm down. He told me to go back to the bedroom. I thought I was set up and going to get robbed. I pulled out my wallet and handed him the money I had. He took it, looked at it, and laughed. He threw my cash back in my face and yelled, "Where's my effing Coke?" I was trembling. I explained I didn't know anything about Coke or where his was. The girl was looking through the room frantically while he pointed the gun at me. He held the gun to my head and told the girl if he didn't get his Coke back, I was dead. I was shocked. It was a physical impossibility that I could have taken anything from him. He was high out of his mind and just rambled on about his Coke. He had me sit on a chair, pointed his AR at me, and interrogated me for what seemed like an hour. The girl looked through the entire house. Eventually, she came back to the room, and the girl found his Coke under the pillows, on the bed. He gleefully laughed. "My bad. I forgot I put that there. You want a bump?" I got up, said, "The door," and walked out of the bedroom. He made some one-eyed small talk, unlocked the door, and said, "Goodbye." It seemed like I was watching myself from an outside perspective when I was walking home. I felt like I was on autopilot. When I got home, I closed the door and flopped onto the couch and shivered uncontrollably. I silently cried for a little and went to bed. This effed me up for a while. I couldn't go to parties or talk to new people. I didn't socialize for over a year until I moved away. Next story. I'll add my parental kidnapping story. Sperm donor, my mom split when I was 4. I was then adopted by my stepdad at 7. When I was 12, the sperm donor picked me up from school, despite my protest to the school that this wasn't right. He kept me for 3 days, did things that should never happen to a 12-year-old, let alone a guy to his daughter. My mom eventually got me back, but I was a mess afterwards. Just added to the PTSD that I already had from other issues involving the a-hole. Been in therapy off and on since. Next story. Met a guy online. We had fun talking, had a lot in common. He asked me to stay at his place over the weekend. I get in his car and fall asleep. I wake up 4 hours from home in the middle of nowhere with zero, and I mean zero, cell phone reception. What proceeded to happen was 13 days of trying to get home and not really knowing what day it was. He kept me awake about 20 hours a day, filled with non-stop horror films, because I was stupid enough to tell him I hated horror films. I only remember eating once or twice. I didn't tell my roommate where I was going. My family thought I was at home. I had just quit my job, and literally no one was looking for me. Eventually, he caught a cold, and I was able to talk him into taking me home, where I promptly blocked him on everything and blocked it from my memory. A few years later, it really sank in that I was probably going to end up dead, and dealt with the trauma with humor. Next story. I have a story on how I was almost murdered or kidnapped. I was riding my bike and a white car pulled over and a girl got out with a gun and pointed it at me and booked it as fast as I could. Then I heard the lady yell, "Crap!" Then got in the car and drove off. The worst part is we called the police and they said it wasn't worth their while. I always think about what would have happened if I froze up. Thank goodness for my fight or flight. Next story. Does kinda sorta kidnapped count? When I was very young, maybe 4, I'd gone to my bio-father's for the day. He'd wanted to see me, which was a rarity, but it wasn't supposed to be overnight. My mother came to get me. My father insisted I wasn't there, that he didn't know where I was. He wouldn't let her in the house. Cops were finally called, and I went home with my mother. No charges were pressed because it was considered a custody dispute. All I remember of that night was finger painting. I wasn't allowed to leave the back of the house, and my father's wife, I think, was painting with me back there. It's the only time I ever finger painted, so it stood out. Next story. I went through a phase of sleeping around at about 20, and I met a guy online. We hung out a few times. It was purely casual sex, and occasionally we would get food / I would stay over at his place. He was, in a weird way, kind of a gentleman about it, and he was getting out of a bad relationship and wasn't ready for anything serious. I appreciated how forthcoming he was. One night we do the usual, and to be honest, it was always good sex. I knocked out, but then he got a call to go to work. He told me it was fine and I could just stay asleep. I wake back up because I think I hear him coming back. That kind of like almost asleep feeling where you aren't sure if it's been a minute or several hours. In walks a person in a big parka that definitely isn't him. I'm freaked for a second, but then they take the hood off and it's a woman, so I get like slightly less scared. At first she seems kinda okay, though not surprised to see me, which in hindsight should have seemed weirder. I blame the sleep. She gives the impression that she's someone else who's hooking up with the guy periodically and had intended to. I distinctly remember making a joke to attempt to lighten the mood that went something like, he sure gets around, doesn't he? I tell her I'm going to clean up and head out and go to the bathroom. When I come back out of the bathroom, everything has changed. I had been wearing a t-shirt of his, and she started cutting up my own shirt and bra with a steak knife. I froze up as she explained to me in a weirdly calm voice that I was sleeping with her husband and that I would need to wait for him to get home to sort things out. I sat in the bedroom there for several hours and debated my options. A few times I almost got up the guts to try and rush her, but I'm like maybe the weakest person I know, and I just didn't see how it could work out in my favor. She never came directly at me with the knife, but about half the time she would just be staring at me and moving it between her hands. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get out of there. I remember I kept thinking about how I'd never see my mom again. When she heard his car pull up outside, which turned out to not be his car, but another one using the driveway to turn around, she left me alone in the bedroom. I climbed out the window into the snow wearing nothing but underwear because she had made me take his t-shirt off. Needless to say, I was a shock for his neighbors to find banging on their door. She was gone when the cops got there. I also stopped having casual sex. Like, no shame on anyone else, but I'm no longer comfy sleeping around people I don't trust completely. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Next story. He was a worker, male 26, who picked me, female 17, up after I had run away after a horrible fight with my mom. As soon as I stepped foot into his room, I got locked in for 3 months. I physically didn't leave that room for 3 months. I peed in the cat's litter box and ate whatever he brought home from work. I wasn't allowed internet or the phone. I wasn't allowed showers, to brush my teeth, or use a hairbrush. I wasn't allowed to go to school. I didn't speak to my friends or mom for almost 3 months. My entire life was wake up, get beaten, get essayed, eat cold hummus, repeat. Well, not to make light of the situation, this is obviously horrible. I'm just curious to know how OP got out of this eventually. After 3 months, did he just set her free? Did she escape? Some more information, I think, would really bring this thing full circle. But either way, so glad that you're okay, OP. Next story. I was almost taken a few years ago. Got picked up by an Uber driver who didn't match his picture. I confirmed the name, got in the car, and watched him drive off without starting the ride. Acted like he didn't know what to do, and then asked repeatedly to see my phone. Then he just told me he'd take me where I was going without the app for free. F no. Told him to pull into a parking lot and realized he had a child locked in the back seat. I screamed enough that he let me out. I went into the store in the lot and watched as he waited, staring at the store door for 15 minutes. Most terrified I've ever been. Next story. I provide physical therapy services to a wide variety of patients in a large regional hospital. Guy was a respected professional in the community who went off his psych meds and worked himself up into a cardiac issue. Later started accusing various hospital staff of all sorts of bizarre crimes. Became increasingly paranoid as his psych meds could not be restarted due to possible interactions with his cardiac meds. I entered his room for a therapy session and he calmly asked me to close the door because it was noisy in the hallway. Once I had done so, he grabbed his IJ line, a type of central line that's inserted into your internal jugular vein, and threatened to unalive himself by ripping it out unless I listened to the charges he was leveling against his medical team. He would not let me leave or use the phone, and any movement I made led to him yelling and tugging on his neck. So I listened to his increasingly absurd claims until, about 20 minutes later, he allowed me to use his room phone to call the police to file a report. I convinced him that this was the best route to take. So I called the hospital police, stating very calmly and clearly that they should come up to this gentleman's room right now to take his statement on the events of the day. I told him I would stay with him until the police arrived. They did. We got him into a safe position, and I left to file a long incident report. Next story. My brothers and I were apparently being held hostage by my crazy stepdad and his friend who were threatening to kill us, or so the police were told. So my brother went to this daycare ran by a couple. The husband was a retired Marine. The wife was the main daycare owner. After going there for a few years, they get a divorce and the husband comes to live with us because my stepdad and him are pretty good friends. One day, out of the blue, we hear someone speaking on a loudspeaker outside our house. I can't remember what he was saying, but I had a WTF-like thought, and my stepdad and his friend looked outside the window to see a SWAT team surrounding our house. My stepdad and his friend come out with their hands up, and they're asked if they're holding us hostage. They say no, and we peek around the corner of the doorway and wave. They asked us all to come outside and sit down. My stepdad went to talk to the on-scene commander or something, and I guess raised hell. He didn't like the fact that they had pointed guns at us. Turns out that my stepdad's friend's ex-wife, the daycare owner, was getting pissed/crazy at him for the divorce and called the cops, saying how he and my stepdad were holding us hostage. We had to tell the cops that no, we weren't being held hostage, that's where we live, everything is okay. What's crazy is she did it again a few months later. Luckily, that time they sent out a patrol car first to check everything out. Next story. Much less of a story than some others here, but I was suspected of having stolen $50. So my friends all decided that it was a good idea to physically assault me and empty my pockets. I was held against my will on the kitchen floor of a New York State Trooper's home for probably a few hours, while the contents of my pockets had people's balls rubbed on them, just to add insult to injury. After things re-escalated to physical violence, I decided to approach it as if it were a kidnap victim and pleaded with them to bring me to an ATM so I could pay them to let me go. It seemed to get the message across to them that they were doing some really not great things, and the person that actually stole my money, F you, Kyle, just happened to find the money in a room I was never in. I haven't been around nearly any of those people since that night. Next story. According to court documents, I was kidnapped when I was 6 months old by my own mother, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. I was put in the trunk of a car, and this eventually led to a confrontation where my dad chased her into a police station. I have literally no recollection of this event that understandably almost no one in my family feels comfortable talking about, and my mother passed away a few months later, but I did later find a police report describing the incident, and it led to my dad receiving full custody of me in the aftermath, an extremely rare occurrence for a father, especially one that's not divorced, and my mother was ordered to move in with her parents or be institutionalized. I'd imagine I'd view this as much more shocking or traumatic event, but since there's no memory of it at all, I don't really feel anything about it, and it's just a kind of fun fact. I only kind of wish I'd gotten to meet my mother, as I only have one concrete memory of ever seeing her, and it's somewhat fleeting. Next story. When I was maybe 4 or 5, my legs started to swell up and turn red with white spots all over them, so my parents did the reasonable thing and brought me to the hospital. Sadly, our doctor wasn't there, but if he were, it would have been different. The doctor took me back to a room, without my parents for whatever reason, and looked at my swollen legs and came to the conclusion that, oh, he's been abused. Female dog thought that my parents were squeezing my legs too hard, called the cops, and wouldn't let my parents see me. My dad was ready to kill people. The police knew my parents and knew they didn't do it. They also wouldn't let my personal doctor in to see me, which is illegal. Finally, the police brought me to a real hospital where I got some blood work done, and turns out my white blood cell count was off the charts. I had an infection that could have killed me. The doctors in this other hospital were pissed that she did this. Next story. I had to teach early in the morning in the city, and my ex-boyfriend suggested I spend the night in his living room. I took him up on the suggestion, and when I got there, he went full psycho, berating me for breaking up with him, calling me a horrible person, etc. He had done some horrific things before. This was also awful. I tried to leave, and he blocked the door, took my shoes, and hid them, yelled that no one would take me in if I left. I kept trying to leave, but he was so huge I couldn't get past him. I curled up on the couch while he screamed and yelled and said horrible things. I woke up early in the morning before he did, found my shoes, and escaped before he woke up. Next story. In Scouts, a kid held a knife to my neck because he hated me, because he was an edgelord and wanted to threaten a younger Scout. He let go when a counselor came by. Let's just say that kid never came back when I told the counselor what just happened. Kid threatened to murder me, and that sealed the deal, and so he was ejected. Threatened to find my home and gut me because I ratted him out. Oh man, almost wanted to give him my address since we had enough firepower to arm a unit. Next story. I worked with one of the Iranian embassy hostages. He was among the black people they released early. He said it was so hard because for a long time they thought they were going to be killed at any time. Once they took some of them to a stadium and took a couple off the bus into the stadium, and then they heard shots and people cheering. They figured they were next, and short time later, they brought them back and took them to their jail. They just didn't know from day to day. Next story. I don't know if it counts as being held hostage per se, but my mother was a lifelong drug addict. There was one night she was stoned out of her gourd and held a loaded shotgun to my face, screaming, "I wish you kids had never been born. You ruined my life. You ruined my fun," or something to that effect. I was defiant, sure, but there's the fact that someone was so stoned they could have easily pulled the trigger and held that gun in my face for what could have been an eternity. Next story. A drug deal gone bad. I had no part in it, but I was with a friend who was. He said we were going to go smoke weed with some old friends. Before long, they asked if we knew anybody who took pills. Our guy we got from liked them, so we set up a meet. Our guy comes with cash and weed to trade for his stuff and gets in the car with us so that the three of us are in the back and the two old friends in the front. As soon as he gets in, the driver pulls off and the other guy pulls out a gun and tells us to hand over everything we have. My friend made a fuss, but we handed all our stuff over. I didn't have much of anything besides my phone, but our dealer was out about $1,000. They began driving us around and tried to intimidate our guy into telling them where he kept his stuff. When he didn't, I guess they had got what they wanted and dumped us on an exit ramp off the highway. I don't talk to any of the parties involved anymore, as this was a low part of my life. I felt something was up from the start, but didn't act on it. Trust your gut, kids. Next story. My ex lived on the higher floors of an apartment block. She was very erratic and paranoid and tried to chuck herself out of the window. I tried to leave, but she had deadbolted the door with an extra lock. She tried to stab me, and I found myself punching and kicking the front door to get out. I broke both hands pretty badly and needed surgery on both after she reset the bones. I learned that you can't break down fire doors with your hands. In the end, I jammed a bedroom door closed and piled what I could behind the door to keep her from getting in, and I threw myself out of the window and broke my ankle and back. She's in special care now. I wish her all the best. Next story. When I was in 4th grade, my school had a bomb threat, and the guys were negotiating over the phone, and they threatened to blow up the campus if anyone left that wasn't permitted to. Turns out it was bullcrap, and they had done the same thing around the country with like a year difference between them. Bomb squad went in and looked everywhere and didn't find crap either. Next story. My great-grandfather was fighting in the Spanish Civil War. He was from Almeria, on the Republican side. Him and a few other Republicans were put into the back of a guarded truck. I can only assume they were going to be taken somewhere and killed by the nationalists, if he hadn't somehow found a way to jump out of the truck and escape. I'd have to check with my dad, but this could have occurred after the Civil War, in which case he'd have been taken by Franco's men to a concentration camp. Next story. On a holiday in Thailand, I agreed to go back to a Thai girl's place, which turned out to be little more than a shack in the woods. While I was there, I had two thoughts about having sex with a random girl in a developing country. Things got even more awkward when her friend turned up and went to sleep on the only bed. I announced I was leaving, to which the Thai girl asked, "Do you know how to get back to your hotel?" "No, I don't," I replied. "Well then, you can't leave," she pointed out, "unless I show you the way." She basically held me hostage until I agreed to have sex with her, which in essence is a sex crime. A nightmare for some, an absolute pipe dream for others. I guess it's a matter of perspective, but in a vacuum, yes, definitely a sex crime. Next story. I was 18 selling coke for an Italian about the size of Rocky. Someone stole $1,600 from me. He said, just meet my friends and bring what you have plus whatever you have left over. I had to borrow a friend's car, and I meet them and go and hand it to him, and one guy shoves a stick in the ignition of the car, and the other slaps cuffs on me and puts me in their truck to Santa Cruz Mountains where the dude lived. Turns out he didn't believe me and thought I just used it all. He knew my sister had money and has me call her, asking her to pay what I owed. Was there 2 days cuffed to a railing. First night he comes down and asks me again what happened and tells him the same thing because it's the truth, and he's all jacked on roids and coke, so gets pissed real fast. Asks again, I say the same thing. He pulls his arm back for a punch, and I have a hard head and, like a dumbass, take the punch and just stand there. He gets even more angry, pulls his arm back for another hit, and I'm thinking real fast at this point. If he hits me again, and I let my body collapse to the ground, pretending wailing and asking him to stop. He's satisfied and leaves. I stand up after I hear the door close and think to myself, that was some pretty fast thinking there, knowing I could have just kept taking the hits, but I'm not an idiot. Sister shows up the next day, and I've got one hell of a black eye, she said, and was the last time I'd seen him. And last time I sold anything illegal. Next story. I had an abusing ex when I was 15, and I had to stay out of their house. If I went home, I had to leave early in the morning and go straight to their house or cause issues, so I would run away to go to their house. I had to stay in their room. I could eat once a day, whatever they brought home. I could only shower with them when they wanted to. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV. Could only play certain games that weren't ranked so they could continue their streaks. Next story. This is really lame. When my ex and I were together, he was developing bipolar type 1 and schizophrenia in our early 20s. He was self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. Once he got super mad at me, threw a kitchen chair at me, grabbed a gun, told me to call 911, and locked himself in our room planning to shoot himself. Why, yes, there was coke involved. How did you know? I screamed, hoping to drown out the gunshot sound when he called 911. When he heard me on the phone, he flipped out, ran out of the room, and told me to hang up or else. I was scared and told the operator, never mind, please don't send anyone. He said, too bad. I said, G-U-N. Someone was on their way. I called from a landline so they knew where I was. My ex grabbed me and put me in the car and drove away to avoid the police. Then he had a moment of clarity and realized he was kidnapping me. He took us back to our house and met the police. He told me what to tell them. I was nuts. There was no gun. I'm dramatic. No chair was broken, yada yada. I don't think they believed me, but they didn't press it. I wish they brought me into the station. Even though they separated us, I was still in the house and didn't feel safe telling the truth. Cocaine's a hell of a drug. Next story. My father, who was getting low on drugs, decided to hold us hostage and decided he wants us to die as a family. Luckily, my brother is still in school and kind of waited for him while my father opened the gas oven. So police came in first, luckily, and he went to prison. I have little memory of the event, but even as an adult, I'm not really comfortable being held down, even when playing, or being cornered with nowhere to go. So I think that was the effect. Next story. My father held me hostage when I was a baby/toddler. I was too young to remember, but my mom told me about it. Apparently, I was sleeping, and he held a gun to my head in a car and called her to come outside. He was doing it because he was abusive towards her, and was probably mad at her about something. This was back when I was living in Chicago, and my father isn't a great person. His family is into gang stuff, drug dealing, and I know he was around this time. He was also doing cocaine, so he just wasn't doing well. We aren't close at all, and he's not a great dad. I just act like I don't know about it, but I once got drunk and called him and yelled at him about it. Bad times. He wasn't happy about that and called my mom, upset that she told me about it. I really don't know what he does with his life. I don't live in Chicago anymore, but he still does. We rarely talk, and when we do, it's just so he can send me money since he never supported me as a child. Next story. Gonna be vague, but in college, I dated a really wild, slutty girl who had a lot of other men and cheated. Some of these other guys were a kind of weird group that decided I shouldn't date, but should do slave labor for them basically, and were willing to use force and fake lawsuits to impose this. Her and I broke up and I moved to the West Coast. Her other boyfriend's family and his group harassed me on and off for years. Until 2018, they got my family, who were controlling, and stole my car to go along with saying I was mentally unwell, missing person, and having me detained in a crooked rehab for a month, then sent back east against my will. I'm not insane, just pissed at getting cheated on, or my car being stolen, but they wanted me to be the bad guy to protect their good names. The LA authorities are quite pliable about this sort of thing, and I got screwed over. My California friends were too flaky to help, and I escaped by getting a high-paying political job on Long Island and buying a car, only to return home to California and start dating and get cheated on a lot again. The last part kind of broke me, and I deleted all my social media and became a hermit the past year. My family apologized for coercing me home and atoned with money and car replacement, but I don't trust anyone anymore. I moved to a new city and didn't tell anyone, and I'm trying to start over. Next story. This was actually my mom's story, and it was a near hostage situation. This was in Ireland in the late 90s/early 2000s. Her and her boyfriend had gotten into a fight and were really loud. They were so loud that the neighbors called the cops. Both were mad, so they went up to egg the neighbor's house. She was in the front garden and her boyfriend was at the neighbor's, egging the house, when a white van slowed down and started to pull up to the side of the road. A man, blonde, 5'9", my mom described him, rolled down the window and said, "Hey, sweetheart, you look lost. Why don't you get in the van?" My mom, being the sensible 20-year-old she was, ran away from him and hid in a bush further up. He opened up the side doors of the van and started shouting at her to get in the van. "Get in the van, you female dog! Get in the effing van!" Eventually, he gave up and drove away. It wasn't until 2006 that she went to the police about it. Turns out he was a serial killer and had murdered 2 to 3 girls previously.